Hey everybody, this is the final part 7 of our series building a responsive website from scratch. If you've made it all the way through, congratulations! Let me know down in the comments if you found this helpful, as well as any other videos that you'd like to see here on the channel in the future. In this video, we're going to build the footer out using CSS Grid. If you want to watch the whole series from the beginning, click up here to see part 1. Otherwise, let's get into it. So before we get into actually building the footer, I wanted to point out a mistake that I'd made in a previous video that I just now noticed. And the issue that some of you may have noticed already is that there's horizontal scroll bars appearing. And this is caused because the hero content, the images that we had sort of made offset, have forced the container to be wider than the viewport width. And that's what is causing these horizontal scroll bars to display all the content. So the way to fix that is in our code. If we go down in our global Sass file to the body selector, we can add overflow X hidden. So what this is going to do is it's going to trim or cut off any extra content outside the viewport width. So now when we go back to the website, there's no more horizontal scroll bars, which is good, but we can still scroll vertically because we only did overflow X hidden, not overflow hidden, which would cut off anything extra and prevent you from scrolling vertically or horizontally. So this is one way to fix issues when you do things like I did, like moving things kind of offset from the viewport, or if you have an off-canvas menu, you might need to add overflow hidden to some of the properties. So I hope this helps any of you who may have noticed this if you're coding along with me. And let's get back now to the rest of our website. All right, so first things first, let's check out our design. So we have here the mobile design and then the desktop design open in Adobe XD. Let's take a bit closer look at the mobile version first. So in the mobile version, we have all the content stacked to one column. It looks like everything's also centered. And the different parts of the footer are the EasyBank logo, we have some social media icon links, then we have some text links, a CTA button, and then at the bottom, the copyright info. For the desktop version, if we go over to that, it has the same content. However, instead of just being in one column, the content is split out into 4 columns. So the first column is going to have a logo and social media. Then we have 2 columns of the text links. And the last column all the way on the right is the CTA button and the copyright info. All right, so now how are we actually going to build out this footer? Well, as in most things, we can use multiple different approaches. We could use flexbox if we wanted to. I think that would be a perfectly fine solution to build out the footer. I think I'm going to use CSS Grid. And the reason for that is I want to show you all different ways that you can use, flexbox, CSS Grid to do layouts. And we did use Grid last time with the articles section, but for the footer, I'm going to try to use a feature of CSS Grid called Grid Template Areas. And it's a really cool feature. It is a little weird with the syntax until you get used to it, but I promise it'll end up being more intuitive as you get along into it. So how Grid Template Areas works is you still sort of designate the template, meaning the rows and columns in your grid layout, but you can use named areas for each of the different areas in your layout, and you can use those names to assign where in the grid you want those areas to take up. But first, let's just get the basic styles in place. And I'm actually not even going to use CSS Grid for the mobile design because everything is simply stacked in one column and then centered. Then when we do the desktop design, we will use CSS Grid as well as the grid template areas. But the first thing we want to do is we want to create our HTML markup. So I do want to keep in mind what I eventually want to be building for the desktop version. So for example, I can't just have, individual social media icons or individual text links just in the footer tag itself. I'm probably gonna have to group them together so we can lay out them a bit more easily when we do use Grid later on. So for example, I would probably have to group the logo, or I would have to group these social media icons together in one div. Same thing with these text links. I might group them into 2 different groups. And then at the end, I could group the CTA button with the copyright info. We'll see more as we get into it, but we're just sort of keeping that in mind as we're building out the layout, even though we don't have to use Grid for mobile. Let's go into our code editor, VS Code, and in our index.html file, I'm going to start creating the markup. Okay, so I'm going to put everything in a footer tag. So footer, and I also need to create actually a new Sass file. So let's go into our app folder, SCSS subfolder, and we'll create a new Sass file called _footer.scss. So that's open. And then of course, since we create a new Sass file, we need to add it in the main SAS file. So import footer, save that, and looks like, yeah, our live SAS is working. So we'll just close this up. And then I'm going to just move the footer over to the right side so we can see both index.html as well as our styles. So in our footer tag, we're going to start adding the different content that we need. So the first thing was the logo. So the logo is usually going to be a link. So I'll say anchor link. I'm just going to make the href a pound. And in the link, it's actually an image because it's just loading that logo image. So we'll add the image tag and we'll say source is images. And let's see, it's a logo, probably this logo SVG. So that's going to be the logo. And I guess we'll start giving things a class as well. So the first thing I'm going to do is give the footer tag a class of footer. I know that seems kind of redundant, but in our SAS file over here, it makes it easier to sort of follow the BEM or block element modifier approach because the class of footer will be sort of the root and then everything else comes from that. So for example, for the logo, we're going to give it a class of footer __ logo. So then the same thing in the SAS file will follow that pattern __ logo. And the ampersand again just means that it inherits the root, which is footer. Okay, let's go on to the next section. So under the footer was, I believe, some social media links. So we'll create a div called footer. I'll just say social. So in this div, we need to add all of our social media links. So since they're links, again, we'll add some more link elements. And I'll just, again, do a pound for the href since they don't actually exist. And then again, each link is going to be, I believe, an image. So image. And the source should also be in the images folder. And let's see, which one was first? So in our design, so it's Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Pinterest, Instagram. So Facebook's first. So images, and it looks like icon Facebook. And then I'll give it an alt of Facebook. So we'll do the same thing for the other links. And I think there were 6 total. Yeah, it's 5. So we'll just duplicate this by selecting it and then pressing Control D. So there's 5. So I think the second one was YouTube and then Twitter. So YouTube. I'm guessing it's just called, yeah, YouTube. Then Twitter. And then change the alt. And I think Pinterest was the next one. And the last one was Instagram. There we go. So we got the social links, and then let's kind of look back at the design. So after the social links were the text links. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to create 2 groups of text links. So let's say footer links, then we'll add maybe another helper class, and we'll just say link, maybe column 1. There we go. And then we'll add our links. Oops. A link. And the links was the text here. So we'll just copy this over. I think it was 3 per group. There we go. And then we'll duplicate this. So this will be footer links column 2. And we'll just replace the text. Okay. About us contact blog, career support, privacy policy. Let's just double check and make sure. Yep, that looks right. Okay, and then last one is going to be the CTA, and I'm going to create one group to enclose the CTA as well as the copyright. So I'll say footer, I'll just say CTA even though the copyright's in there too. And the first thing will be the button. So I'll say a class of button. And then the text was request invite. This is basically the same button that we've had earlier in the website. And below that is going to be the copyright info. And I'm going to make a separate div for that. So footer copyright. Easy Bank, all rights reserved. I may have deleted that somehow. So I think the symbol is copy. Easy Bank, all rights reserved. Okay, so now we have our markup, and let's create the corresponding styles in our SAS file. And we're just going to kind of build out the skeleton. So we got footer logo, so the next thing is footer social. And in the social, we do have some links and images. We'll just leave it like this for now, and we'll add it as we need. So the next thing is going to be footer links. And then footer links column 1 and column 2. So I'll just add those as well. Okay, then after that is footer CTA. And then button. We might need a button, so I'll just say a button. And then the last thing is going to be the footer copyright. Okay, so save that. Okay, looks good. So we're not going to have too much on our website, but let's just kind of see what we have here. Okay, so we have the logo loading. This may actually be a problem because this is the logo that we used up top with the sort of dark color. But this is, I believe, yeah, so the footer has this dark blue color in the background. Let's just add that now. So we're going to have to, I think, modify the SVG. And I think we should be able to edit it. We'll create a new SVG for the dark, for the white on dark, and then we should be able to edit that manually. So footer, we'll give it that background color of that dark blue. And it should be in the variables SAS file, so yeah, dark blue. And then I'll just say color white, just to sort of give it a default. And maybe actually, since everything is a link, we also want to say a color white, just to make sure that all the text links will get that white color. Okay, so let's see what we got now. Yeah, so you can see with that logo, it is not visible. So let's make the new SVG file, because I think we only had that one logo image. Yeah, just that one logo. So we open the SVG, it's actually just like text, so you can, cool thing about SVGs is that you can edit colors. So you can see here, these different colors. This is probably the colors of the symbol in the back. So the, you know, the sort of diagonal stripes, but we need to edit the text, and I'm guessing it's this thing, path fill. And this is just the letters of Easy Bank, I'm guessing. So let's create a copy of this logo SVG file, and then I'm going to rename it. Rename logo, let's say dash dark, because we're going to use that on a dark background. So Alt Z to wrap the words. And I believe this is the path fill, and that we want to change that to white. So we'll say F. And we can't use SAS variables in here because it's an SVG. It can't use SAS stuff. Okay, so we'll change to logo dark in our index.html file. Logo dark. Let's see if that worked. Hey, there we go. And let's just double check that does seem right. Yeah, that seems right. It's just white. Okay, let's add some padding to this so it looks a bit better. And I'm actually going to just turn on the responsive mode so we can see what it actually looks like. So we want to add some padding on all the sides, and we also want to center the text, all the content. So let's see how much padding we need. So using my little rectangle that I created, it's going to kind of estimate it's about maybe 40 pixels on top, and I'm guessing on bottom. So about 40. Yeah, that's close enough. And then maybe we'll just do 40 all the way around. Nothing is actually reaching out to that far, but I think, you know, we'll just keep it at 40 just to have some padding all the way around. Okay, so in the footer itself, we'll say padding and 40. 40 divided by 16, 2.5 rems. And again, that's because to get from pixels to rems, you divide it by 16, which is the base font size by default. And rems are just a more accessible way that you can size things, because it gives the user control if they change the zoom in their browser or even modify the base font size in their browser. If you have measurements in rems, it'll sort of scale up or scale down with the browser. As opposed to pixels, it would stay pixels no matter what. So it's just better to use rems as opposed to pixels. You can also use EMs, but I like rems. Okay, so now with the padding, let's see what we got. Okay, it's good padding. And text align center. Looks good. Now we need to start adding spacing. So I just kind of go from top to bottom. So I want to add spacing under the logo and on down. And again, I'm just kind of estimating here. So it's about, let's say 30. And then under the social, okay, so we'll give 30 pixels of space under the logo, also under the social, and then I'm assuming under the text links. There's a little bit less, but we'll just say 30 for everything. Just makes it easier. Okay, so want to add footer logo. We'll say margin bottom, and we'll say 30. So 30 divided by 16, 1.875 rems. And I guess we'll just add that margin bottom to all the elements that wanted them. So footer social, I believe, needs it. And then only the second footer link, so footer links column 2, will have margin bottom as well. And then I think under the button, so in footer CTA, under the button, we'll add margin bottom. There we go. Okay. Margin is not taking under the logo. Why is that? It's there. Maybe it needs to be display block. Or oops, don't want to do it for footer A. Footer logo. Because footer A is every single link, which is like pretty much everything in the footer. So display block. And the reason this worked is because before display block, the element, I'm assuming, yeah, anchor elements are display inline by default, which means that they just kind of display however the default flow would be. And you can't add things like margin and stuff. It just won't take effect. So you can say display block or display inline block. Display block, it'll take up 100% of the width that it can. If I do display inline block, it will only take up the width of the actual content. So maybe display inline block would be better for this. So footer logo, display inline block. Okay, looks good. So it looks like the margin did work for the other elements because those are divs, and divs by nature, they are by default display block elements. Now we need to add some space between the social icons as well. Let's see how much space there is. 15 or maybe 16. So I'll add 1 rem of space using margin right. So okay, so footer social, which is this section here, and then I'm going to add the space to the anchor links. So again, we probably need to do display block so the margin actually takes effect. So display inline block actually, because display block will make them all 100% width, which is not what we want. We want them next to each other. Display inline block, margin right, 1 rem. Oh, and I don't want to do it for the last one. So I think I could use the not last child. So if it's not the last child, it'll have this margin right. Okay, and that looks like it worked. Let's just double check. So margin, and then they all have margin, and then the last one does not have margin, which is great. But I think I do want display inline block for all of them, so we'll just do this. Okay, cool. Now the next thing for the text links are each on their own row. Oh, what I could do is I could make footer social a flex parent. Let's try that. So display flex, and then I do need to set flex direction to be columns so that they'll be one under the other instead of trying to fit them all in the same row. So flex direction column. Oh, not for social. I want that for the links. There we go. Okay, so now they're very nicely in one column and centered. What I think I actually need to do is add some alignment to the flex parent. So usually to control horizontal stuff, that's justify content, but because it's vertical, align items should control the width of the children. So let's say align items, and let's just say center just to see what happens. Okay, so there we go. So now we have centered them all, and then it only makes the flex children take up the actual width of the content itself. So let's add that in our style. So align items center. Align items center. This looks pretty good. I think we also want to add some space between the text links themselves. Yeah. Let's just say 20, because there's usually a tiny bit of space from just like line height. I wonder if I could just use line height to make that space. Let's experiment again. Line height 1.5. Oh, so if I do 2, it actually looks pretty good. Increasing the line height makes it take up a little bit more space, which results in there being space between the links. So then I don't have to add a margin to add space between them, which is like sort of nice. So that looks maybe a little bit more. Line height 2.25 for footer links A. And I don't think this is actually necessary anymore since I fixed it with the align item center thing. Yeah, that seems good. Okay, so I think that this is basically the basic mobile styles. Let's move on to the desktop styles. And in desktop, the most important thing we need to figure out right now is what the grid template for CSS Grid is going to be. So I think initially I'd said we're going to make this a 4-column layout. So the first column would be logo plus social, then we'd have 2 columns of text links, and then the last column would be the CTA button and the copyright. Now I think that I'm going to also make it 2 rows because I want the logo to be on one row and the social media icons to be on the second row. So that means the entire template is going to be 2 rows and 4 columns. And I think the easiest way to demonstrate that is just to use Adobe XD and to sort of draw squares around each of the cells. So it's a little bit easier for you, but also for me to see what the template's going to be. And then I can write the code in the SCSS file. So let's start with that now. So we got 2 rows for this first column, and then we'll just have the same, going all the way down. So that's the first column for text links and the second column for text links. And this isn't super exact right now, so there is going to be spaces between the cells, but just for illustrative purposes, it's not going to be exactly correct. So it's going to be something like this where we have 4 columns and 2 rows. So this means that using the grid template areas, this top one would be called logo, and then this one would probably be called social. This one I'll just call links 1 and then links 2. And then the last one will just be CTA. And we'll use those names to assign the locations in the template to each of these content blocks. All right, so in our code editor, we need to figure out where we want to write the code for the footer layout. For CSS Grid, kind of like flexbox, you have a parent element and then you have the child grid elements. So the parent element in this case is going to be the actual footer tag itself. And then each of these areas are going to be the child elements in the grid. So the first one would be logo, Second one would be social, then the links 1, then links 2, then the CTA. And these are all direct children of the parent footer element. So in our SAS file, we want to add display grid for, I think, probably just desktop and up. So we can do that with a breakpoint, or a breakpoint mixin. So include breakpoint up, large, and at this point we will add display grid. So again, this means that on mobile and tablet, it's not going to have the grid layout, it's just going to have that stacked one column layout. And we'll do the same thing for the other properties as we add them. So display grid, and then grid template columns. And we wanted 4 columns, right? So let's take a look at what we want the widths to be for those columns. So it seems like these first 3 columns are probably roughly around the same width. And then the last column is going to be wider. I'd say maybe, you know, we can say these first 3 columns would be 1 FR, or FR meaning fractional unit. And then the last one would probably be maybe 2 FR, maybe 3 FR. I'm not really sure yet. And that will make this last column either twice or 3 times the width of the first columns. So we'll just do 1 FR, 1 FR, 1 FR, and then 2 FR for the last one. And we can use the repeat function. So the first 3 columns are 1 FR each. So we can just say repeat 3, 1 FR for the first 3 columns, and then the last column will be 2 FR. Then we want to add 2 rows. So I'll say grid template rows. And we want 2 rows, probably the same height for each. So again, we'll use repeat 2, 1 FR, which means the space, each row will be given the same amount of space. Okay, now the last thing is the grid template areas. So this is a little bit tricky. It just has a bit different syntax, and I know that when I sort of started using grid template areas, it was a little bit confusing. But basically, going back to our design, you write out the names of each of the areas sort of in the place where you want that block to be in the grid. So this one's going to be called logo. It's going to be going across in the first row from column left to the right. It'll be logo, links 1, links 2, and then CTA. And then the second row is going to be social, links 1, links 2, CTA. So using the same name for 2 different cells, it tells the browser that that area is going to take up 2 cells. So the first one's going to be logo. So how this works is we just type in logo, and it is in a string, as you can see here. Then the second column is links 1, then links 2, and the last one will be CTA. So this is kind of the representation of the first row, with each name taking up 1 column. Now we have 2 rows in our template, so we're going to add a second one in a string again, and instead of logo, the social media icons will be the first column, then links 1, links 2, and then CTA again. So this is our grid template. Now you also need to, in addition to creating this in the elements themselves, and I guess I should put this in a breakpoint as well. So include breakpoint up, large. We tell it that the grid area name of this element is logo. And this is part of the slightly confusing thing, but this does not need to be in a string. One place that I look to a lot when I'm confused about grid or flexbox stuff is CSS tricks. So a complete guide to grid, and they also have one for flexbox. So we're looking for grid areas. This is kind of telling you how the grid template areas work. So you can see they have things in quotes. Then in the actual element, you just have the name and not in quotes. Again, this grid area property of logo will tell the browser that the footer logo element subscribes to the logo grid template area. So we have to do the same thing for each of these. So I'm actually just going to copy this. And then this is the footer social area, and that's going to be called social. And then for the links 1, we'll put it in the column 1, and then we'll do the same thing for column 2, which will be links 2. And the last area will be the CTA, and that's going to be the entire footer CTA element, which contains the button as well as the copyright info. So that's going to be, I think I just said CTA. These grid area properties, they'll sort of match to what's in the grid template areas. All right, so this looks pretty good. Obviously it's not completely accurate at the moment, but this is a really good start. Let's turn on, in the layout tab, the grid inspector. So I want the footer to be highlighted. This is a super helpful tool if you are working with flexbox or grid. Firefox has these special flexbox and grid inspectors, and it just tells you a visual representation of what you have. We actually have not only the lines to designate the rows and columns, but it's also telling you the names of the grid areas that we just created. It says logo, social, links 1, links 1, links 2, links 2, and then CTA. And it also tells us that with this dotted line, it's sort of telling you that the area is taking up those 2 cells, whereas for the logo and social, there's a solid line between them, indicating that they are separate. I think that, let me just uncheck the display area names so we can see a little bit better. But we need to kind of align these correctly, right? So let's work on the horizontal alignment first. And I think we want the logo and the social icons to be aligned to the left. You can control alignment in 2 different ways. One is sort of global alignment when you set properties on the grid parent. You can also set properties in each grid child to just control the alignment of that cell. So there's a lot of control that you have using CSS Grid. And let's kind of figure out what we want to do here. If you look at the design, we do want the logo and social icons to be left aligned, and we also want the text links to be left aligned as well. And then the CTA and the copyright are right aligned, so everything's kind of like flush to the edge. So I think we could try using justify content space between. Is that doing anything? Doesn't look like it's doing anything. This might be a flexbox thing. Let's go back into our handy CSS tricks guide. So justify items. Aligns grid items along the inline row as opposed to align items, which aligns along the block. So let's try justify items start. So justify items start. Oh, there we go. I think what I was doing was justify content, which I use a lot in Flexbox, but I think that just controls the child items as a whole. Justify content. Yeah, so it's the total size of your grid. So that seems okay. I also want to, I think, maybe set text align left for desktop because it was centered due to the mobile styles. And then we can fix these as we go along. Now, why are these centered? Line item center. I have a few different things going on here. So I have the footer links. It's a flexbox parent. Let's turn off the grid. Look at the flexbox. I had done align item center, and I actually want to align items. I believe start. Yeah, start. Because in this flexbox parent, it's going vertically. So align items will do the cross-axis arrangement. So I just need to remember to set footer links align item start for desktop and up. So footer links, and then for breakpoint up large, we're adding align item start, and then I'll make sure that the links themselves are aligned to the left. And the other thing we wanted to do was for the grid template, justify items start. Let's go back to the grid inspector. So now we can see that the text links are aligned to the left, the logo and social are aligned to the left as well. And then for the CTA, we want to align that to the right. I think we can say justify items end. Oh, this is not a grid thing, so I can't do that. I guess I could try text align right. No, that's not right. Oh, it's because I did justify items to the left. So I think because this is an individual, this is the grid child item, I can't do justify items. I have to do justify self because that applies to the individual child itself. So I think if I do end, there we go. So if I do text align right and justify self end for the footer CTA desktop styles. So under the breakpoint area. Okay, so it looks pretty good for the horizontal stuff, right? Let's just double check and compare that with the design. So yeah, we got the logo and social media icons on the left. These are aligned left. This is aligned to the right. And that does seem like what we have. So now we need to figure out the vertical alignment. You know, it looks like things are a little bit all over the place. So we go back to the design Let's just draw a box around the entire footer area just to see how things kind of line up with each other. Looks like things are kind of extending out to the top and the bottom. They're like pretty much almost flush. So if we go back to the footer parent itself, I think what controls the vertical alignment is align, justify content and align content, just control the grid in like the greater parent. So if I want to control the alignment inside the grid, I have to use items, so align items. Okay, aligns grid items along the block axis. So the values can be start, end, center, and stretch. So I think I want stretch, so it goes all the way to the top and the bottom. So we'll try that. It didn't seem to do anything. Something else is adding this extra space. I wonder, I might have some margins actually. So let's look at the links. Oh, there is a margin in the social. So let's just cancel that out. So margin bottom 0. And then I guess the logo also, there's a margin there. Okay, I might just need to go back and move all the margins that I added for mobile into a breakpoint down media query, because I only want it to take effect on mobile and tablet. So let's see where, here we go, margin bottom. So include breakpoint down. So I want this to apply to tablet and down. Oh, medium, I mean, medium and down. And then we'll add the margin bottom there. Let me just copy this media query. So same thing here. Margin bottom here. And I think there was one, yeah, for the button. Okay. Now that we've removed the margins from desktop, let's see how the site looks. Did that help at all? See, the social icons are still like really, they're too high. I want them to be flush to the bottom. What happens if I do an align self for footer social? I'll get rid of the height thing, turn on align self to the end. Does that seem right? It seems a bit tall. In any case, we want them to be on the top and bottom anyway, so let me add align self to footer social for desktop. Okay, the text links themselves look okay. Now I need to do this, the aligning for the CTA section. So in the CTA section, we have this, and then we have a copyright. So I think if I do align self, is stretch an option for this? Oh, it is. Stretch not working. This is kind of annoying. Okay, I'm just kind of curious. Start, have it end. I think I may need to separate these out into different cells so I can sort of align them the same way I did with the logo and the social. So footer CTA, I'll only have it have the button, and I'll delete that extra div and then do that. So then footer CTA is in its own thing. Footer copyrights is in its own thing as well. So let's go back, and first I'll have to add a grid area for the copyright since that's a new thing. So include breakpoint up large grid area, and I'll call it copyright. Then I'll need to add the copyright name to the grid template. So before we had the CTA and copyright in one thing, now we're going to have CTA on top and then copyright on the bottom. Okay, much better. So now we can sort of try to, we'll add another rule for align self end, and then justify self end. Okay. Okay, that looks pretty good. I do feel like things are a little bit taller than they should be. You know, I wonder if the font size should be smaller for the text links. You see that? This should be 15 or so pixels. How big's the font size right now? It is, if we go to computed, font size is 18. And where did that rule come from? It's just from the body font size. Okay, so for the footer links, I need to set a font size of 15 pixels. So that should help with making the content less tall. I'm guessing it's going to be the same font size for mobile as well. So font size, 15 pixels divided by 16 is 0.9375 rems. All right, let's give that a shot. Okay, looks shorter, which is great. Maybe the Easy Bank text itself needs to be a bit smaller too. It's probably about the same, 15 pixels. So we'll copy this property and add it to the copyright as well. Okay, maybe there's just too much space. Because I had initially added all that space using line height, so if I reduce line height, it's still a bit tall. Interesting. Let's just say line height 1 just to make it really short. Oh, you know what it is? It's because I set the row. I set the rows to be 1 FR, which means the top row and the bottom row have to be the same height because that's how I set it. But obviously the bottom row, the social media icons, and the copyright doesn't need to be the same height as the top row. And the top row looks like it's getting its height because of the button, which is making everything be too tall. Let's fix this row problem first, and then we'll figure out if we need to decrease the line height for these. So instead of 1 FR, I think the second row should be something less. Where is it? Here, grid template rows. So the first top row should be 1 FR. If I do auto, it'll just, oh, if I do auto, it just sort of does that. Let's try that. So in the parent, we'll change grid template rows to 1 FR and auto. Here we go. So instead of this repeat thing for the rows, we'll just do 1 FR and auto. Okay, so this is shorter. Now the line height is kind of what's limiting it. So let's try 1. Okay, see, now it got really short, which is great. Maybe 1.5. You know, maybe I don't want to use line height because that's kind of like making it a static distance. What if instead, in the footer link, since I know that is a flexbox parent, I could say justify content space between, and that will sort of auto stretch to fit that. So I think that's a much better way of doing that, at least for desktop. We want the line height for mobile because we're not using grid for that. So footer links for desktop, here we go. I think I personally just do justify stuff before the align properties. Okay, so this looks closer, which is great. Now I'm guessing that this button might be a little bit tall. I'm kind of curious where this height is coming from now. Oh, I forgot to take out the line height. Okay, that's no problem. So maybe I'll just remove line height for the footer links A for desktop. So I just want to use this on tablet and mobile, so I'll use my breakpoint down. And I know that I usually use the breakpoint up, meaning I use min-width media queries, but I think in this case, because we're adding styles for mobile, I would prefer to use the breakpoint down using max-width media queries. Otherwise, I would have to cancel out all the margins and line heights for desktop. That looks a lot better. So I think maybe this button is now what's kind of making it a bit tall. Okay, how big is this button? Oops. It is 46 pixels tall or so. And how big is it on the website? Okay, so it is 46. You know, I'm not going to split hairs here. I think this looks pretty okay. So even though it's taller than it is on the design, I think it's okay. And I just kind of added some space here so I'm not blocking it with a picture of myself for you all. It's kind of weird. It even looks like there's more space in the design. I think the logo and the social media icons actually might be a little bit too tall, so let's just tweak that and then we'll sort of consider this complete. The logo should be 23 pixels tall and about the same for the social icons. So let's see what we got. 20. And the icons look like they're 25. Okay, so yeah, they are a little bit big. The image itself says 20, which is good. And then for some reason the thing is 25, the anchor link. Maybe I just need to set a height. If I set a height of 20 pixels, will that help? Oh yeah, it does. Okay, we'll just say height 20 pixels for the footer social A. Social A, here we go. And I'm assuming the same height will be for mobile as well, so we don't need to use a media query for that. So 20 divided by 16 is 1.25 rems. That seems all right. Okay, now that I look at this again, I think that there's a couple things I need to do. The first one is I need to limit the footer content so it doesn't go all the way across. I think I forgot to add the container class. So let's do that first, and then we might need to tweak some of the alignment. Okay, so in the footer, I'm gonna have to add a container class. Container. And I don't remember if I want to add the padding helper classes, but let's just move these into the footer container. And because originally the footer tag itself was the grid parent, I'm going to have to move all of the grid properties into the footer container. So footer, and then we'll just put it here at the top, container. So we'll move all the grid stuff into the container element. Okay, hopefully that'll work. Let's take a look. Okay, much better. So now we can see it's not going all the way to the left and the right. Things just seem cramped even though the height's like so tall. Is that button really the right height? Yeah, it's 46. I need to make the copyright text smaller, I think. Right now it is 15. I'm gonna make it, I think 13. It needs to be a lot smaller. 13 divided by 16.1825. Okay. 8125, not 18. There we go. Okay, I think the color was darker too, right? It's not white, it's kind of a light gray. What color would that be? Maybe grayish blue? So, you know, this is just kind of tweaking, trying to double check the design and the site and just make sure everything looks correct. Yeah, there's more space between the button and the copyright. Something is not right. I wonder, is it including the padding that I added? No, this is 70. Oh, okay, so it's 76. Okay, so it is adding the padding. So it's actually now it's too short, which is the same as like what I was thinking it was. So let's increase that line height again to make it taller. Line height 1.5. Oh wait, wrong selector. Forgot a second underscore. There we go. Maybe 1.75. 2.25. 2.25 line height is giving us the correct height of about 100. Okay, glad we figured that out. So footer links A. I knew something was off. Took me a while to figure out where it actually was. There you go, footer links A. Oh wait. Is that the same? Oh my gosh, it's the same freaking line height. So let me just remove this media query. There we go. Okay, this looks much closer to the design. Okay, so now we've gotten the height right. I think we need to tweak this like horizontal spacing. It's too close here and there's too much space, I think. So yeah, so it seems like there's more space between EasyBank, the logo, and then the first text link. Let's see, how do I want to do that? I guess I could maybe increase the width of the first column. So if we go into the grid parent, instead of making all the columns the same, I could just try to tweak these a little bit. So I'll probably leave the text links as 1FR. And so I'm just going to try this out in the browser. But what if I said 2FR, 1FR, 1FR, and then 3FR? Maybe 2FR. Well, maybe 3. Okay, let's see how close that is to the design. Hey, that's not bad. There's a few things that look like they're off. So there's just a tiny bit more space between these. I think I also forgot to add a grid gap property, so let's try that. Gap of maybe 1 rem? 2 rems? Let's try 1 rem. So that gap property, let me just show you how that looks. So it's adding space of 1 rem or 16 pixels between all the cells in the template. So I think that's probably good to keep. So I need to add gap of 1 rem And then I need to change the template itself. It'll be 2FR, 1FR, 1FR, 3FR. Okay, so grid template columns. Place this. And I know I could use repeat to 1FR, but I mean, it's kind of the same at this point if you're only repeating it once. And then what else did I wanted to add? Oh yeah, the gap of one. I'll add the gap under areas, I guess. 1 rem. Okay, that looks pretty good. Let's compare with the design again. That looks fairly close. And I'm actually okay with, like, I have a little more space between the social icons, but I think that's okay. Alright, now moment of truth. Let's see how this looks on mobile. As we decrease, once it hits that breakpoint for tablet, it goes to 1 column and it is centered and stacked. And then for mobile, I'll just turn on the emulator thing. That looks pretty good. So I think we have the basic styles down. Now let's get to some sort of, let's kind of polish it up a little bit. There's a few things I usually try to add. Main thing is hover states, because these are all links and you want the style to change slightly when you hover over them so you know what's going on. So for the socials, let's check the design. Oh, here we go. So we did some, if we hover, it turns green on the social icons as well as the text links. And then the request invite has the same thing where it like goes to white. So let's do those. The social icons, that would be social icons, the images. They're SVGs, and we want to change them from the white to the green color. Now, since I loaded these SVGs as image tags, I might actually change that, because what I want to do is change the fill in the SVG itself. Let me show you what that looks like. So icon Facebook, if we look at that. So it tells you the fill is FFF, which is white. And there is actually a way that you can alter that in CSS, but only if you're loading the SVG as an SVG tag and not the image tag. So I'm going to have to change this. So I'm going to copy this. So we're actually just using inline SVGs at this point. And then I think, can I just move the alt? No. Huh, there's no alt for that. That's interesting. I'm just curious about this alt tag for SVGs. Accessible. It's purely decorative. It doesn't need alternate text. I think we do because they're like social icons. Inside the SVG, add title. Oh, must be the first child of its parent element. And it'll be used as a tooltip. That's helpful. Okay, so let's do that. So say the first child here. So path is the first child originally, but now we're adding titles and we'll add Facebook. That's pretty good. And we'll have to do the same thing for the other ones. So YouTube, copy that, place the image, and then add the title, YouTube. So now, let's load it up. Everything's the same. Let's just double check. Yeah, so it is actually loading the SVGs, which is good. If we hover, it tells us the title, which is great. So now, to adjust the color, to adjust the hover, we want to, in the SVG, alter the path fill. And we can do that in CSS, which is pretty awesome. So if we go down to social, A, so in the A tag, it's going to be SVG path. That's going to be the element. Social A, hover. And I could nest it under the A element, but okay, maybe I'll do that. Under the A, hover, SVG element, and then the path element is going to have fill of the green color, lime green. And then we also want to add its transition so it's a little bit more nice looking. Hopefully this works. fill, and then how fast we want it to be, maybe 150 milliseconds. Ease in, out. Oh, hey. Very nice. Cool, so we were able to add the transition and the hover fill color for these social icons. We want to do the same thing for these text links as well. So that's going to be in the footer links A. So footer links A, hover, color, lime green I think it was, and then of course we're doing the same thing. So transition, color, 150 milliseconds, ease in, out. Oops. Okay. There we go. Nice. And the last thing we want to do is this button hover state. And you can see it's losing opacity when you hover over it. And that's because when I first coded this button, it was just on a white background. So I could simply reduce the opacity and make it sort of look like there's a white overlay. Obviously it doesn't work with a dark background, so I'm going to have to build a semi-transparent white overlay over the linear gradient color. So I think I can do that with a pseudo element. So let's just sort of try. So in our global Sass file, going down to the button styles. So right now the opacity thing, I'm just going to comment that out because it's not really working for us. And I'm going to have to add a pseudo element. So let's just try the before. And content is blank, so it shows up. You have to have a content property set for your before and after elements. Then I'll say background, color. I should just do background since it's using a linear gradient. I think background is actually, linear gradients actually apply to the image, if I'm not mistaken, background image. Oh, let me just see if that's correct really quick. Yeah, so yeah, background image. And unfortunately background image does not transition nicely, so we might have some issues when we do this, but okay, going back here. So we're making an overlay. I'm going to have to position this absolutely, I think, because we want it to be on top of the rest of the button. Right, 0. And this is just to make it go to, you know, all the different edges. And because it's positioned absolute, I just need to make sure the parent is position relative, which it is. That's good. And I'll make sure the position absolute child will sort of remain inside the parent, which is relative. Then background, color. And because we want it to be RGBA, so it will be semi-transparent. So white is 255, 255, 255. And transparency, let's just say 0.25. We don't want to go full white, otherwise you won't be able to read the text. Okay, now let's just see. Let's see how that looks. And it's not attached to a hover state right now. I just kind of built it to sort of test and see how it'll look. Ooh, that looks pretty close to what we had before, actually. So set opacity. So opacity 0, it won't show up, and then it'll show up when we add, when we get rid of the opacity 0. So I'm going to use that for the hover state. So this actually was a pretty easy solution. I thought it was going to be a bit harder than that. So by default, we'll set this opacity to 0. And then on the hover state, we'll set opacity to 1. So we want to transition that so it's nice and smooth. We'll use 150 milliseconds like the other hover state speeds. And then on hover, hover on the parent, we're going to make the before element opacity 1. Hey, not bad. Not too shabby. Okay, so I think we got our hover states pretty good. Let's just double check and make sure the top one works too. Oh yeah, nice. Sweet. So let's just check one more time, see how this looks on tablet and mobile. good. Let's just use the emulator so it's easier to see. So here's mobile. Looks pretty good. And then iPad. I think that's okay on tablet. If you wanted to, you could also make this like maybe 2 columns on tablet, but I'm just going to stick with a 1 column because I think that's fine. And it's at the bottom anyway, so it's not like it's blocking. It's not like people have to scroll past it. Cool, so I think we can actually consider this whole web page complete. All right, wow, we finally finished. I hope that you've enjoyed watching this series, as well as seeing all the thought processes and decisions that I had to make while building this website. If you have any questions or feedback, you can always leave them down below in the comments. And as always, thanks for watching and keep on coding.